Here.
Here.
Here, everyone please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone please be seated. Tonight we have a special meeting and this is primarily for the purpose of the public hearing on the preliminary budget. And I think that the agenda is as stated with one resolution, but let's have a motion just to accept that agenda.
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed. Next item would be the public hearing on preliminary budget. Do I have a motion?
I'll move it to open the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. So is there any comment, from the public in attendance tonight with respect to the preliminary budget?
Seeing none, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, second. All in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. So the next item will be the resolutions, and this is the carryover resolution that was required to have the number of days after publication. Mr. Clerk, that was published properly, correct? Okay, this is Resolution 2019-186, a resolution adopting local law number 6 of 2019, which would amend Chapter 240 zoning, Chapter 230 vehicles and traffic, Chapter 217 subdivision of land, and Chapter 175 peddling and soliciting of the town code with respect to a variety of matters. And the resolution and the items that are being amended are attached in your agenda for it.
I know we had pushed this off a few times. I had asked council for clarification regarding the vehicle part of that. So with him not being here, I would ask, I know it's, to have it tabled again.
Oh, why? What's the question? Because
It had to do with the registered weight.
Yes.
And we've got, in both the third and the fourth ward, we've got a number of constituents that have heavier vehicles than that, such as repair maintenance guys that, the 14, 15,000 pound vehicles, and we were looking for those people to get exemptions.
I think the exemption was with respect to SUVs and other items related to that, and I believe that was amended as requested. That was a request that came out of the planning board meeting.
Right, now there is an issue with section 230.19.1A, which is section 4 of the proposed legislation, which defines a commercial vehicle as 18,000 pounds.
Correct.
That's the concern. There are individuals, not only in his ward, but there are individuals that take their tractor from their tractor trailer home. They don't bring the whole trailer, they just bring the tractor, and they park it in their driveway. There needs to be some sort of clarification relative to the size of the property and the size and the zone, I would say. For example, if I own a tractor for a tractor trailer and I live in Indian Village, obviously it wouldn't be appropriate for me to bring my tractor trailer home, right? Because it takes up your entire lot. But if you have a 3-acre parcel on the other side of town, it might be more appropriate. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed here. There needs to be some sort of clarification relative to the size of the parcel and what zone this restriction is going to be in.
Well, Mr. Rand's here, but in response to that comment, we've had numerous discussions and have had a number of problems within the town, Bill, where people have been violating and they
Right.
haven't been able to be ticketed, because they're parking on the lawn, they're parking on, and the weight vehicle. Jim can explain the weight vehicle issue, as to, why we amended it the way we did. The councilman has raised an issue, Mr. Rand, with respect to, property size and dimensions, as to whether or not to allow certain vehicles in certain types of property.
Well, we have a provision in the code currently. So this is amending the existing provision in the code regarding the vehicle weights. The current provision in the code prohibits the parking of commercial vehicles as defined that weigh 8,000 pounds.
Right.
And you're correct, it applies across the board regardless of zoning district or property size. The only thing that would be exempt would be a property in an ag district. We wouldn't have any ability to control vehicles that are parking in an ag district. But other than that, it would apply throughout the town, in residential districts. It's a prohibition in a residential district. The original amendment that we had discussed, was just to add the word registered. Because the provision in the code was difficult to enforce, because without the word registered, in order to make out a prima facie case, we'd have to weigh the vehicle. Which, the sheriff's department said they really didn't have the ability to do that while it was parked in the driveway. So we put this provision in place to add the word registered. The planning board, when it was referred to them, reviewed the weight restriction, and they had a concern that 8,000 pounds was too low. The vehicle is primarily designed for tow trucks or, larger commercial type vehicles. And those would be in the neighborhood of 10,000 pounds. So the planning board had suggested that a weight limit of 8,000 pounds would prohibit the parking of Ford F-350s, Expeditions, and other larger vehicles. So the suggestion to get up to 9,500 would then not prohibit those vehicles being parked. With respect to the size of the lot, I do agree with you that the provision is really geared for places like Rockingham or the smaller subdivisions. If a person has a 10-acre parcel and, they're parking a vehicle somewhere in the back of the property, at this point in time, they could seek a variance, an area variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. But I think it would be, we've got a number of provisions in our code, particularly regarding accessory structures. There's a lot of provisions in the code that are geared for the majority of the lots in the town. The Rockinghams, Indian Village, places like that. And they don't really fit for the larger zoning districts. However, the other problem is that in our 3-acre, 5-acre, R3A, R5A type zoning districts, there are smaller lots in there as well. So it's kind of a trade-off. So if anyone had a vehicle that exceeded those limits, they certainly could go to the ZBA and get, an area variance for it, so.
What are we trying to achieve, though, with this? Are we trying to prevent people from parking commercial vehicles in residential zones?
Yes.
Correct.
So to Councilman Beal's point, I do know of a number of constituents in the third that do drive tractor trailers. They're registered at 80,000 pounds. I can't see, a guy's been doing it for 15 or 20 years, to turn around and say, you now have to go to the ZBA, you've been doing this, your neighbors don't care, you're in a 5-acre, wherever. I think it's a lot to ask for them. And what can we do for that?
And I think that I think it would be appropriate for issuing a special permit for a use like that. where, you know, somebody had a large lot and they were an over-the-road trucker, or, you know, they had a small, a plumber who may have a larger vehicle.
What do we do with like the oil service mechanics? Those vehicles are, I mean, they're very heavy. They're, you know, it's an oversized pickup, but, I mean, so my question is, so you have a neighbor who's not happy with you and calls, they have to get cited because they're breaking the law, right? So how do we protect these people that have been in, you know, just, nothing's changed other than us putting in a law?
Well, actually, the law is currently in place.
Okay.
This law is actually, as this is drafted, this is going to make it a little bit better for some of those folks. Because the weight is now going from 8,000 to 9,500. Now, the other issue, though, is we put in the term registered, gross registered vehicle
Right.
weight. That way, we don't have to actually do a weight. And so, you know, I think that's appropriate. But to your point, you know, we have a number of people who, I mean, the other provision, I believe, the current provision in the code requires that the vehicle be owned by the owner of the property. So if you are, if you work for Central Hudson and you take home a Central Hudson truck, and that's part of your, you know, you're a lineman or you're, you know, a supervisor, technically, I believe you're in violation because you don't own the vehicle. So,
Yeah, but, hold on for a second. So this is where there's got to be some philosophical, you know, thought process here, because there's a fine line between,
Volume 23.
it's good to see you have things under control over there.
The computer just rebooted.
So there's a fine line between, you know, zoning regulations that are designed to minimize impact on neighbors versus government overreach,
sure.
which I would say I work for Central Hudson and I'm a line foreman and I'm taking my truck home tonight because we're expected to have a wind event like we had last week. Sorry, that's against town of Wappinger law. I mean, I have a problem with that.
Theoretically, that could be an emergency exception.
Yeah, but we shouldn't have to have all these theoreticals here. I mean, we need to, you know, legislate in a way that's fair, that we're not overreaching. And I think specifically, there are major differences between, you know, the half-acre zones, you know, lots versus the 3-acre zone.
I totally agree with you. I mean, what this amendment proposes is to make the existing regulations enforceable. And it limits, it actually expands, like I said, you know, went from 8,000 to 9,500. But, you know, I think it's certainly, we could certainly draft it so that, you know, the parking of certain commercial vehicles, because that becomes the other issue, is if you take on a large lot, are you going to permit cranes, bulldozers, you know, construction equipment, things of that nature? Now, that's not to say, you know, people own backhoes. You know, people, I have friends who, you know, have
Kubotas.
larger and smaller property. They have backhoes, they've got, you know, bobcats, you know, things of that nature. They're not landscapers, they just, you know, putter around on their property a lot. So, you know, right now, we don't, it's unclear how that type, I mean, that's typically, you know, that's not registered as a commercial vehicle, but it's, falls within the definition of what we have as a commercial vehicle. However, the argument there is it's not being used commercially. It's being used, you know, for that property.
We have a guy
So-
on 9D who collects FDNY fire engines.
Right.
So, you know, you can't have it at your house in your driveway because it's now against the law.
Technically, I don't think that's a commercial vehicle.
Well, if it's not being used for emergency purposes, if it's
I mean,
he's collecting it.
You know, I mean,
collector's item, I don't
we
know.
could certainly exempt, I mean, I know, you know, I know people who collect farm equipment, antique farm equipment. I've had that issue in some municipalities.
I just think I think just the legislation needs to be sensitive to the size of the lot and the zone that it's in.
I don't disagree, and, you know, the problem is that this, you know, as it stands now, the current code would prohibit that. It just, you know, as Chris had mentioned, you know, the dispute between neighbors, we will get a call for an 8,000-pound vehicle. You know, the problem is now, you know, we can either say, well, we can't enforce the code because we have to go out and weigh it. I agree that, you know, that's certainly an amendment that is appropriate, but I think that it needs to be packaged with some other amendments. You know, Mike can tell you how many garages over 600 square feet and more than 2 accessory buildings on a lot, variances come before the ZBA because we have, and, you know, we also have a prohibition of putting an accessory structure in a front yard. Well, we've had before the ZBA variances to put a garage 200 feet from the road because the house, a front yard is the space between the front of the house and the road. Well, some of these lots, the houses are so far back, they don't even really have a backyard.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, one of the things is that the ZBA exists to provide flexibility in the zoning code. To the extent that you make your zoning code, you know, in a certain way, there is the way out. I do agree that it's not necessarily, we've got a lot of different areas in the town. Indian Village is not, you know, Smith Crossing Road or Didell Road.
Right, exactly.
And, you know, the way, and, you know, the regulations that we have for the Indian villages and the Rockinghams don't necessarily need to apply, you know, on large lots that are more rural in character. But my suggestion would be to adopt this, to address the particular issues, and we can certainly get started. I've said that on a number of occasions. I said it frequently, said it when Mike was on the ZBA. I've said it, you know, to practically every ZBA since then, because we get a lot of those variances. Al can tell you. And, you know, I think I do agree that that's something that we should address for those, you know, accessory uses, accessory structures, and, you know, these parking restrictions. The challenge on the parking restrictions is you don't want to have a commercial ongoing business in these zones for the most part, you know, but, you know, if you would, you know, a landscaper who has 3 employees, 2 trucks, you know, is that something you would permit on a 5-acre lot? You know, we don't, you know, that's the thing that, because in some respects, it's not very different than a farm. I mean, you can have a farm right next to a property which has probably a more intensive use, you know, than some of the things that would be contemplated. One of the things that we have in the code right now is a limit on accessory buildings being no greater than 600 square feet. Out on Didell Road, unless you're in an ag district, you can't put a barn up. You can't have a barn that's 600 square feet. I mean, that's a small barn. You know, it's basically a 2-car garage. Don't know of many barns that are the size of a 2-car garage.
Does our code speak to trailers that are used
Well, that's the other, I mean, that's the other thing. There is a limitation. I believe it's one trailer. The code allows for one trailer or one boat and that's the other thing too, which is really kind of the exception rather than the rule. We've got a lot of, some of those larger lots, you're allowed either an RV or a boat.
Because the issue that I'm hearing from constituents is folks are buying these very large RV trailers that have the bump outs and everything on them, and, they're like 45 feet long, and the people are parking them in their side yard in front of their house, and it's obstructing the view from the neighbor's house to the street, and now's the time of the year when they're winterizing
Sure.
them. And if you drive through some of the neighborhoods, you'll see these, some of them look like they're almost bigger than the person's house.
Now, I'm not, off the top of my head, I'd have to look to find that in the code. I believe parking them in the front yard is prohibited.
It is, you're supposed to park it in the back or on the
So you
side.
could park it in the
But
side.
is
The problem is
Bill's
you can't even
No,
get.
'cause they're so
They're so
big.
big, you
Right.
can't get them
Yeah.
to the back or the side. They're
Right.
huge, so they have the tongue
Yeah.
right on the street.
And
So I'm not
that's-
saying,
I mean,
I'm not saying we should legislate that right now, but we need to be consistent with our code. If we're telling people
Yep.
they can only have one 5x10 trailer, right, in their property, and their neighbor has a 45-foot-long RV, we got, there's a little bit of a,
No, it's an issue.
You know?
It is.
No, and I mean, it's also from an enforcement point of view, because, we have a limited amount of personnel to go out and enforce the people who would enforce these things are also processing building permit applications,
well,
doing foundation.
I'm also not saying that we should be going out there and writing everybody tickets that just went and bought the one that was on sale at the end of the season. I think that we need to just better educate ourselves and, what is our mission? Is our mission to minimize the impact on neighbors? Or is our mission to legislate people's property? And,
Part of minimizing the impact will necessarily, regulate, things. I mean, that's the whole point of
if you're
zoning.
if you're on a small property, that's the whole thing. If you're on a large property and you have 12 trailers back there, people may not even know. We
Absolutely.
may not know. You can't,
Right.
you can't just walk down the property and look.
I mean, it's one of the benefits of Google Earth and, Google Maps and Bing and Parcel Access and, I know there are some municipalities that have drones for zoning enforcement.
And that's a can of worms we don't want to get into.
No, but,
I mean, I don't want to
it's-
be spying on people's property to see what they're doing. I think that crosses another line. If there's things happening on someone's property that are impacting neighbors, then I think that gives us the right to investigate. But ultimately, there are municipalities that are flying drones for zoning purposes. And I think that's a big brother situation that I don't want to be going down that road. I know that there is a parcel in the first ward that we had used aircraft for surveillance on. I didn't agree with that. And at the end of the day, there was some tickets issued, but it's now back to the way it was before that. So, I would argue the benefit of that. So anyway, if you're recommending that we approve this legislation tonight, we can continue to explore it. I don't have an objection to doing that, as long as we're not going to box ourselves in somewhere.
No, but again, I think that, for a lot of reasons, one of the things is, to the extent you adopt restrictive zoning provisions and then don't enforce them, the town loses credibility.
Exactly.
And that's kind of one of the things that I say a lot of times when drafting zoning ordinances, you have to keep in mind how they're going to be enforced and how frequently they would be enforced, because, what invariably happens is the person who is the target of the enforcement then comes into court with pictures of 10 other people and says, this person has it, this person has it, this person has it, why are you going after me? And, so, I mean, while that may seem unfair, you know, I think that, you know, we have to be cognizant of that when we're looking at the legislation, and I do think it would certainly be appropriate to look at, particularly on the large lots in the town, broadening out some of these things, because, as you said, a lot of the large lots, we can't even see them.
Yeah.
In this particular case, Bill, this is as a result of the unenforceability because the sheriff's deputies would have to go register away
Yeah.
the
Right,
but I
vehicle.
mean-
So in this particular case, it's at their
This
request
is
in
a,
order
this
to
is,
enforce
this
it.
is a particularly, you know,
Yeah,
the cases, the small lot cases where you have, you know, somebody who's doing a commercial business, you know, the bigger issue is that most of the commercial vehicles will have a backup alarm.
Right.
And so you have somebody who's coming home at 1 or 2 o'clock
Yeah.
and is backing into a driveway. You know, if it's a tow truck, it's got a car. You know, if it's a guy who's got, you know, some sort of carpentry business or some large truck, he's now unloading, you know, at late hours of the evening. You know, it's not like somebody pulls into their driveway, takes out their groceries and goes in the house.
And
you know.
even bringing their tow trucks, put it in there, moving out at 4
Right.
in the morning and
Right.
what have you. That's those situations. that
And,
have been
and,
the
you know,
issue.
going back to the whole A&W scrap with the neighbors, you know, and that's one of the issues too, when you have larger vehicles, you know, particularly diesels, you know, they have to, in the wintertime, they warm up a lot. You know, we've had issues where there's a grade, on the driveway coming out, and the vehicle makes a lot of noise coming out of the driveway when it's first coming out. So, you know, there's those kind of ancillary issues. And to your point, if it's a larger lot, you know, and you're 200 feet away or 300 feet away, the noise is not as big an impact as, you know, where you've got a zoning district where there's a 20-yard side yard setback. And the house, it's, you know, maybe, you know, 30 feet to the neighboring house.
So this would be a law enforcement situation or a zoning enforcement situation?
Well, I mean, there's two provisions in here, one regarding parking of vehicles in the street, which is really a law enforcement issue. And then, we've got the parking on private property, which is a lower, so that one is now 9,500. I believe the parking on the street is 18, is a higher weight limit. So, but, you know, in both of those situations, the change is to add registered vehicle weight, so you don't have to get into the issue of weighing the vehicle. But yeah, I mean, the problem is that our zoning people typically don't work at night, and most of these complaints come in during the night, not in the daytime.
I just don't see a police officer enforcing a commercial vehicle zoning regulation at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, they have been going out, and then they haven't been able to enforce it because of the registered wording wasn't in there.
I mean,
Yes,
that's,
we've had those situations, Bill.
What-
on a
what-
I just
regular
don't-
basis.
What happened
I
in-
don't see them doing that, though, as part of their job. I
No,
don't,
you know, they happen. Yeah,
we've had.
I can give you the
Yeah, I mean, the
situations.
state
I'm not
police,
sure how I feel
the
about,
state police won't, the county will,
I'm
and,
not sure how I feel about the town creating a mechanism by which police officers are going to come out on your property and write you tickets for a vehicle that's parked on your property. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's appropriate. I think this is a zoning issue that should be handled by zoning, and I motion to table.
I second that. I think we need just a little bit more clarification on this.
We're going down the wrong road. That's my opinion. I don't agree with this.
I disagree. Okay, there's a motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Yes, me.
Okay.
Any abstentions?
Well,
None.
yeah, I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I don't necessarily am for or against what was just discussed, but generally, just out of courtesy to my colleagues, if they feel they need more time, I usually grant them that discretion. So I just want to let you know that it's not that I have any issue with anything you presented, Mr. Supervisor. It's just that I do that out of courtesy for my other colleagues.
Understood.
I just would like a discussion item at a future meeting that we can have the planner here, the attorney here, and I think it would be a good thing to have the planning board chairman here also.
Well, yeah, I mean, this actually is not an issue that really comes before the planning board.
Well, they've provided input on this.
I know that, I mean, and that's simply because our code provides for that.
Yeah.
Because any zoning, our code requires planning board input from anything, any zoning mechanism, but, you know, in some respects, that's kind of one of the issues, is that this is really a self-executing, I mean, and that's one of the problems, where we've got the accessory use. If somebody wants to put a garage of more than 600 feet, they come in, try to get a building permit, Barbara will say, it's too big, go to the ZBA. Here, somebody just shows up, parks a commercial vehicle in their driveway, and the only time the town will get involved is if there is a complaint. We don't have any pre-notification or, you know, prior approval mechanism. That might be appropriate. That might be one of the ways to get around this. This is just a strict prohibition. But, you know, one of the other ways is to say, you know, you can come in and get a particular use, you know, allow for the vehicle to be parked, if you come before the ZBA or you come before.
But what happens when the
planning board.
ZBA authorizes that use and you still get the complaints?
Again, at that point.
Then a police
you-
officer comes out and writes a ticket? I mean, I don't agree with this. I don't think it's right. I think there's gotta be a better way to do this, and I've never heard of, with all due respect, Supervisor, I've never heard of police officers being dispatched to private property to enforce zoning issues.
We have, you haven't been reading your police reports.
Well, I don't think it's appropriate to be using police officers to do that. And I understand that our staff works 8 to 4, 8:30 to 4, but I don't think we should be using police officers to go on people's private property to issue zoning tickets. I
And
don't think that's right.
again, this doesn't, what's happened in the past is, we have sent orders to remedy.
Right.
Notice of violations and orders to remedy, and they have not been adhered to.
Right, I have a
So-
car that's sitting right now in Indian Village that's been there for 7 years, okay? 7 years. And I'm being told that they're doing the best they can. It's in the front yard, it's got 4 flat tires and broken windows, it smells like there's a dead animal in it. And we still, that was how many weeks ago, Mike? 3 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago, and
It's
I can
still sitting
attest to
there.
that. He's true, he is correct
It's
about
still
that.
sitting there.
You
So-
can smell it from across the street.
Whatever
That's
we
how bad
have
it
in
is.
place is not working. It's not working at all. So I don't know if it's because we just have too much workload on the individuals that are here. I don't know what the problem is, but I have neighbor after neighbor telling me they've been calling here for years, okay? And it has to be at least 2 years, since the last election was 2 years ago, and it's still there. It's still there now, and I'm walking door to door. So I don't understand how that's even possible.
That's the first, I mean, that's the
That's the
first
first I've
I've.
heard of it as well.
So, I mean, but to the.
If you've heard of it before, you should have let us know.
No, I just heard about it 3 weeks ago. And I
Yeah,
reported it to-
we're getting a lot of those, and we respond immediately.
So I went back on Google Maps, and I went back on Parcel Access, and there it is 7 years ago sitting there.
Now, is it vacant
Okay.
property or is it's an inhabited property?
Well, Barbara Roberti's usually pretty good about it.
Yes.
Well, she's working on it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's a process here that is, you know, it takes time, obviously, but it shouldn't take this much time. I mean, the neighbor called me again today.
I mean,
Okay, the election's over and the car's still here.
You know, so that's a property maintenance violation.
Well, the guy's mowing around it with his mower, so grass is cut.
But,
Is
She's
there an
aware of it
easier
now,
way
right?
that we can
She's
let
been aware.
the owner
Okay,
operator
so-
or the over-the-road guy get a, because I honestly can't ask a guy who's been doing this for forever, you gotta come before the ZBA, he's gonna laugh at me, you know that. But half the time, they're not home during the week, they get home on the weekends, and there's a lot. Wappinger's got a lot of over-the-road guys who live here, and I don't think we can punish them, just, that's their livelihood. And
No,
they're 18,000 pounds, they're
I-
16,000 pounds empty. So that's, and you know, over time, somebody's gonna call and complain, and he's gonna get a ticket.
I mean, that's one of the things that we have a procedure that permits home occupations. The problem is the way home occupation, the definition in the zoning code is drafted, is that home occupations have to take place wholly within the property. So if you were a plumber or you were a over-the-road trucker, you could not benefit from that provision because your business does not take place at your
Well,
home.
I don't mind,
But no, it's certainly something that could come in there, and, you know, the parking of and you and I've had the discussion.
yes.
You know, parking of a tractor, or, you know, any kind of commercial vehicle suitably screened that's not obnoxious to the neighbors, I think would be, you know, fine. You know, but what you'd have to do is come in on probably a special permit. You could make it, you know, if it's, rather than, you know, incur a substantial cost to the applicant, it could be something that could be reviewed by the zoning administrator, you know, provided it's set off, you know, a certain distance from any adjoining residence, and, you know, screened with a fence or some, you know, things like that, and it's not, you know, really generating any noise. I think that would be something that would be appropriate, you know, and have a nominal, you know, application fee to review it.
Okay. Sure,
So-
pay the fee, we'll see what we can do. I don't know. We're not going to go and solve these problems here tonight. Let me just say this. Number one, I appreciate all the work that you guys have been putting into this during the daytime and researching this and trying to, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to tighten the code up so we can enforce it. I get it. I just want to make sure we're not inadvertently creating an issue from a constituent services perspective. And I also want to say, number two, Barbara Roberti does an incredible job. And I sometimes think that we need to have better efficiencies in place in order to get some of these things remedied. So that being said, if we can discuss further at a future meeting, I think it might be better when we have a little more time to research, because I will be the first to admit that the last 72 hours have been very tough to do research prior to this
But
meeting.
we've had this on the agenda for months, Bill. It's been
Right.
reviewed a number of times by David Stolman, by Barbara Roberti. I just don't understand what more we need to.
You just heard
Review.
about 30 minutes of discussion
Okay.
of there's issues that need to
Then
be
why haven't you
discussed.
raised this before?
Because
Okay?
we haven't been in a position to raise it.
Yes, we have been in a position. We've discussed it repeatedly. We've had
Why is it
workshops
such a
and so
rush
forth.
to do this now?
There's not a rush. We keep tabling it,
Okay,
okay?
so,
But I'm wondering, why are you raising it now?
because I spoke to
Where
Chris.
you haven't discussed it
I spoke to
before.
Chris yesterday, he brought these concerns to my attention,
Okay.
and then today, when I was doing budget prep, I happened to look at what other towns are doing, and there's some inconsistencies, that's all. That's all, I mean, nothing personal.
Okay. No, it's not personal.
No, I just, I think we do need to get to the finish line. I appreciate that you do, I will say, Mr. Supervisor, you do a great job pushing things to the finish line. Let me just do a little more research, and why don't we do this? When's the next meeting?
13.
November 13th. We put a discussion, do we have time, do we have any?
No, we're gonna have to repost it, you know, for.
I don't think so.
public meeting.
No, you wouldn't have to repost
Why
it.
not?
No, it's just adjourned.
No, we already
You
posted
just
it.
adjourned it.
It's posted.
Yeah, so can we put it on the next, how heavy is the next meeting?
Not heavy at this time.
All right, so can we put a discussion item on with the planner and the attorney and whatever, we have
Sure.
till then to get everything
Yeah.
together, and we're gonna move on it that night.
Then I assume it will also be open for public comment,
Of course,
right? at that
right?
time?
Yeah.
Okay, then the
So-
public's invited to
So we'll keep the public hearing open, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep, keep the public hearing open.
There you go.
It's adjourned.
It's adjourned.
Okay, so the public hearing is adjourned. Why don't we also put on the website that we're gonna have further discussion at that meeting?
Okay.
Does that work? All right,
Yeah.
cool, great, thank you.
Okay, so the next item is Resolution 2019-204. It's a resolution approving preliminary budget for fiscal year 2020.
So, I did take some time today to go through the budget, and this is, you know, in advance of the preliminary budget adoption, which theoretically is the preliminary budget already. But for the purposes of amendments, I looked at a number of lines here, and I'm making some recommendations for some changes. That said, I'm certainly willing to hear any input from anybody else. I can go through this very quickly if you'd like, line by line, as per what I have itemized here, and explain to you how I got to where I got to, if you'd like me to do that. The changes that you're looking at right here include some removals of positions that were in there, but that doesn't mean they're going to be out in the final budget. This is not the final budget that we're discussing right now. So in an effort to reduce spending, I have developed a proposal here that reduces the A fund expenditures by $290,500, the B fund $102,000, and the DB fund $70,000. So if you'd like, I can go through these very quickly.
I think it would be helpful for you to review, but I would like to suggest that we table any really, deliberation or approval so that we can have more time to study and discuss it.
Well, my understanding was we were going to be approving the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2020, and that's what these proposed
Well,
budget amendments are for.
So at this point in time, technically,
Yeah.
the preliminary budget
Time to study this.
is the budget that you have the public hearing upon.
Right.
So
I agree.
the public hearing, was opened and, is available for public comment. So at this point in time, really, you should probably just go to the final the adopted budget. Now, again, as we discussed, there's a couple of different ways you can approach that. You can either propose a package of amendments to the budget, the budget that's currently before you, vote on them all as a whole to get to a final adopted budget. Or you could go through and, itemize each one as you so choose. I agree with the supervisor, it has to be adopted by November 20th.
20th,
Yes.
right,
There's, I believe it's the 13th is the next meeting.
Correct.
yes.
So, you could certainly have a discussion as to, what Councilman Beal is proposing. And, if anybody, has additional, suggestions, proposals, I think it'd be appropriate at this time to at least consider them. And then Frederick can kind of see how they would wash out for purposes of what would be adopted on either the 13th or a subsequent meeting. So if you don't adopt a budget on the 13th, you'd have to call a special meeting prior to November 20th to adopt, because if you do not adopt a budget before November 20th, whatever the budget is to that point becomes the final budget.
Well, these proposed budget amendments, I prepared for the purposes of reducing spending ahead of adopting a preliminary budget. That was my purpose. My thought was, then by adopting the preliminary budget with these changes, we can then move forward and craft it even more for a final product. That was my thought process.
Whether you phrase that as a preliminary budget, you can do that, however you choose.
Well, the resolution is calling for approval of a preliminary budget, and I don't support the current tentative budget before me as the preliminary budget. I believe that there needs to be some cuts made, which I have proposed here in these budget amendments. But I do believe there are some further discussions we need to have relative to, I have some revenue questions that I think would be more appropriate for the next meeting, when we maybe will have a better idea in sales tax revenue, because there's definitely a difference here on the sales tax revenue projection versus last year's. I believe there's also a mortgage tax,
I agree with you on that.
Decrease.
decrease also. So my thought was here, in an effort to show, an effort to reduce spending, I have put together these proposed budget amendments and certainly would be willing to discuss them and include them in a preliminary budget resolution if my colleagues would like to do that.
Okay, I have a question. Who submitted this?
That was something that I believe the supervisor attached.
That was based on the presentations to the board by
Okay,
the
so this
department
is
heads.
From the department heads?
Yes.
So it's not,
Yes.
Were these already done?
No, these were proposed to us
The
by the
requested
department
changes?
heads.
Okay. So theoretically, we could adopt these itemized changes if we have consensus and include those changes as the preliminary budget, and then move forward in the next meeting in further budget discussions for a final budget.
I think that's a prudent choice. I mean, this is not the final budget. Certainly, we can make additional changes before the final one, but it'd be nice to move along, and I do believe that many of these reductions are a good thing in terms of keeping our budget fiscally responsible. Now, if there's a specific item that someone would like to discuss, I'd be happy to do that, but I think in general, I think it's a good idea.
Well, I respectfully disagree in the sense that I believe that we need to discuss a number of these items and some of the significant points that I've raised before. I think, for example, when we're talking about the recycle center, and I think, cutting back our police services and the vandalism patrol raises some real concerns for me, and I don't think, I'm prepared to, even in a tentative budget proposal, to accept those at this point in time.
Well, if there's a
And
couple
so
of,
therefore, I would prefer to let us have some time. We just got this afternoon. Last time, I think Bill and I had a chance, the last budget, to review it at some length. And so I have a lot of questions here that, since we do have some flexibility, then I would say let's, I'm more than willing to discuss this. And as we all agree, we need to cut back. But I think that there are certain areas that we need some further discussion.
sure, of course, I'd be more than
Without,
happy, yeah. I
putting
think-
it as a tentative.
Yeah, of course, I think there are specific items that we could discuss, and certainly,
Right.
in terms of things like vandalism patrol, I certainly agree that we may have to be prudent in making sure that it's properly funded, but, I think in general, I think it's a good idea, but yes, I agree that certain specific items can be discussed and possibly amended to be adjusted to, fit the needs of the budget and our fiscal environment.
I agree.
But as this budget sits right now, I'm not gonna vote yes
Yeah.
for it.
No,
I agree.
I agree with you too. I mean, I'm
I'm not-
in
yeah, I'm
the
not
same
gonna vote on
position.
this cover.
Exactly.
Right, but the reason why we're having this meeting tonight is because we have to approve a preliminary budget.
No, according to what
No,
Mr. Rand
you-
says, we don't.
You don't.
We had to have the public hearing to receive public comments.
Right, but then this
Because-
becomes by inaction, it becomes the preliminary budget.
Correct.
Right, so by not approving it or not making changes to it, it becomes
I
the
mean,
preliminary budget.
so you have a couple of options on the table. If there are if there are changes that are being proposed right now, you could theoretically vote on those changes that you all have a consensus on. And then whatever you don't have a consensus on, leave to next time. Or not. I mean, the only issue that comes up is, to the extent there is no consensus, the budget that is currently before you becomes the final budget. I
Well,
think everyone on this board is going, I don't have an issue with this board not acting to come to a final budget. We've had issues in the past where we've had a preliminary budget by operation of law become the final budget because of things beyond, because of some
Understood. I
issues. But at this point in time, I don't foresee that being an issue. So that's the only issue that's out on the
I was
table.
here, trust me.
So,
I was out there, Joe.
So, I mean, we could run through each one of these real quick, and if we have support or consensus, we could keep it in. If we don't, we'll just table it, each one.
I think that would be appropriate.
I mean, that way, I can at least
That's fine.
tell myself that we've made some effort to reduce spending prior to adopting the preliminary budget. And I do understand your concern, but I can explain relative to the law enforcement thing. If no one has an objection, I'll run real quick through these. Okay, so, the A Fund 1110.410A is Justice Court postage. The reason why I included that here, and I'll give it to you real quick, because I'm not gonna take a lot of time here doing this. It's 410A. The reason why I put 3,000 is based on historical spending. It was budgeted at 6,000, I reduced it by 3,000, so 3,000 is what I was proposing.
The reason why it's going up is because it's mandated by the new law. They have to spend that additional money, and if we don't budget it, then Carl has already told me he'll go and submit it to the court administrator, and they will order us
Spend what
to
additional
spend the
money?
money.
So under the bail, one of the problems is, this is kind of one of the fallouts in this whole, no bail package.
Right?
Is that there's a requirement that when the people leave court, that they have to be notified by mail of their next court appointment.
That's right.
Under the current law, you show up at arraignment, they hand you a slip of paper from the bench, and that's your notice of the next court date.
Okay, strike it,
That's not-
strike it.
Okay.
All right, 1315-198A. 1315-198A was a contingency payroll line for the Comptroller's Office, which, it was actually previously budgeted at $770. It went to $2,000. All I did was suggest it go to $1,000. It's really not that big of a deal. 1420-450A. 1420-450A is town attorney. 1420-450A. Based on the year-to-date and based on the historical spending on that line, I reduced it by $25,000 to $130,000, which is what the previous appropriation had been. And the reason why I did that was in an effort to try to conserve spending. If we need to reappropriate money to the line, we can do that, but just to show good faith on trying to reduce spending. 5010.2 is a highway equipment line in the A Fund, the highway line in the A Fund. Based on historical spending, I put it back to 500, which is where it was in 2019. It's at 3,000 right now, so I reduced it by 2,500 back to 500. 5132-401, which is highway repairs. It's A fund highway repairs. 5132.401. Since it's A fund highway repairs, I would imagine it has to do with the building,
The
capital,
buildings, yep.
capital type
Correct.
things.
Correct.
Based on historical spending and based on the previous appropriation of $20,000, it was increased to $100,000. Basically, my personal opinion is if we're going to spend $100,000 on repairs, we should look at our finance options rather than putting it into the general fund, so I reduced it to $50,000. So I reduced it by 50 to 50. If we need more money, we can move it in there, but rather than having an appropriation of $100,000, that's what I did. 7020.108 and 7020.109, I believe we need to have an internal discussion relative to organization of that particular department, and I just zeroed it out for now. That doesn't mean that this is gonna be the final product. I just thought that at this point, until we have a plan in place, that would be the best thing to do.
Well, I don't disagree. I think if you will recall, Bill, that the sum of the three items here, including down to activities assistant, is my call, was, really a division of what the board had previously approved as to a director, level, senior
Right, no,
position,
I figured that's how you
So
came up with that.
that's where, so Jessica had proposed that instead of that these other positions be filled. So, but as long as we're able to have that discussion
Yes.
before the final budget
Agreed.
on these issues, then I will allow that to exist, but we must have that discussion.
Of course.
Okay.
7110.118A. I was not here for this presentation, which Steve did, okay? I spoke to Steve at length today. I do have reservations about his plan here, and I think we need to have a conversation about this department, you know, there's a number of seasonals that are becoming full-time. And as you know, on the back end, there are other expenses that come along, you know, the fringe expenses that come along with a full-time versus a seasonal. I didn't get into that here. I think we need to have that conversation. What I did in the meantime, though, is I removed the 7110.118, which is that $45,000 employee at this point. Because if you look at his overall personal services line, right now, as it stands, it goes from $260,000 to $348,000. That's a pretty significant jump for that department. So in an effort to show a reduction in spending for the time being, I removed that $45,000 employee in this proposal, and we can have that
Again,
conversation.
so long as we have that
Yeah.
conversation in the overall context
Sure,
of
of course.
all, you know, employment issues within the town hall and job positions, and that, I think it goes for another one or two that you have on here, including the deputy zoning administrator one.
Yes.
Right, I want to reserve that, but for purpose of this discussion, Bill, see.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That said, I did put the buildings and grounds contingency payroll of 2,500 back in, of 2,500. We've had situations here where we need a buildings and grounds person here to come in, you know, on a nighttime event. So I put 2,500 back in, which is what we had previously into that line, which is 7110.198A. On to 7110.212A, buildings and grounds equipment. Based on the historical spending on that line, I decreased it from 25,000 to 25,000. Instead of 50,000, I put it at 25,000. On to 7110.402A. These are just based on historical spending. Park, Castle Point, 2,000, decreased 2,000 to 3,000, which is what it had been previously. Parks, Carnwath Farms decreased by 15,000 to 10,000. 419A, Parks Equipment Repairs decreased 3,000 to 10,000, which is based on historical spending.
And I, you know, would like to
Sure.
interject, Bill.
Of course.
Is that, you know, the reason why, you know, some of these lines, including later on also with respect to the Schlott House and so forth, is because, as you know, a significant amount of neglect over the years with respect to parks and park
Yes.
maintenance, and it has caught up. So, you know, what Steve had proposed, you'll recall he had refused with us, you know, several times, a list of the various parks and park repair items and the needs and, you know, others, you know, such as, for example, at Quiet Acres and the need to redo the playground agreement. So, you know, Castle Point, for example, was relating to the park, you know, the benches
Benches are a
and
mess.
other items there that are a mess. So, you know, but I'm more than happy, you know, I don't have a problem with us discussing it, but I think we need to
I
look
think
at
we need
that.
to discuss
Okay,
it, yeah.
Well, you know, for now, you know, I
I agree.
say, okay, you know, let's do it, what you're proposing.
I'm not
but I think
zeroing any of
it's-
these out, I was just bringing them back in line with where
Yeah,
they were. And
I
like I
understand.
said, we still, if we adopt any of these changes tonight prior to the preliminary budget adoption, we're still gonna have a number of changes for the final budget. And that's gonna be based on what our mission is gonna be moving into 2020.
Agreed.
Listen, you know, we know that we need to look at a couple departments and determine the organizational structure, right? So that's why I basically zeroed some positions out, but they're gonna have to come back in different ways here. On to Parks, Gas, and Oil, just based on the historical, it's 7110.420A, decreased 5,000 to 12,000. Same thing with the next one, which is Maintenance, Schlott House, decreased 10,000 to 5,000 based on historical, but I understand why that was in there, because there's initiatives that you want to do in that park, I get it. But for the purposes of the preliminary budget, I was trying to scale these things back, and then we can do what we need to do for the final. Okay, 7110.459A does not exist. My recommendation was to add that line for Sergeant Palmetier Park. Every year, we keep adding the maintenance and not budgeting it to a line. So my thought was, if we can create that line at 5,000, this way it's in the budget, I would appreciate that.
Is that our park?
It is our park. Well, basically, it's an easement.
It's an easement.
It's
We
an
have an
easement.
easement to that.
It's an
land.
easement that is a lifetime easement that the town has for that property.
And at the end of this discussion, I'll give you a little bit more information about Old Hopewell Commons and what's going to happen on Sergeant Palmetier.
Yeah. So there's going to be some changes there, obviously, when the road moves, but it's still going to be the park. My thought also was 7110.405A was to add Challenger League as an actual league that we support. I understand we support Little League, right, with $6,000. I understand we have in the past supported Pop Warner, we have in the past supported AYF, American Youth Football, and I thought it might be appropriate at this point to show some good faith to the league itself, right? The physical asset is called Inspiration Field, but the league itself is Challenger League, and why not provide a subsidy of $3,000? Just close your ears for a second. We may need some sort of license or contract in place to do this, but why not at least allocate this?
Well, yeah, I don't have an issue, Bill. I think getting back to looking at what our mission is, what we're going to be doing in the future, we have several parks, that we need to address.
Sure.
For example, our soccer fields, right?
Yes.
When we look at, those, and we've had several issues, and important ones that have been raised with respect to that even during the last, few days. And so, I think that the approach in looking at some dedicated lines, again, to the extent that we're able to do it, is not a bad one, but I would certainly like us to look at some of these,
Sure.
that have been tough issues,
I mean-
because they've been ignored.
One of the things that you can do, probably from a budget point of view, is to the extent you want to make a commitment to those parks, you can budget as income a transfer of recreation trust money.
As long as it's a capital project, though, right?
Right.
Yes, yeah, I think.
But some of the issues we have here are maintenance issues.
Maintenance,
Correct. I mean,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
so that's one of the things I think you can look at. And again, whether you can back it out of the budget and add it,
Right.
as an increase in line and, an offsetting expenditure from rec trust, or you could budget it up front as a income source for purposes of
Right.
going.
Well, I
back.
mean, we have money, so, one of the things that I think we have an opportunity to do during budget time is identify our priorities, right?
Right.
And, codify them into the next fiscal year budget,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Right, but I've seen for years here, though, where I've gone through this process, and then, the money ends up not being spent, because let's face it,
No,
we have a lot of moving parts
Yeah,
here.
it's consistent with what we've been discussing,
Yeah, yeah.
over the last few,
Sure.
weeks and months on this. And I think that there are some other tough issues, again, take, the soccer fields,
Oh,
right?
yeah, of course.
Where people aren't locking the gate and, where they're not, turning off the lights, or there's a lot of honking of cars and leaving at all times and disturbing some of our neighborhoods.
Or
So we,
having lights at night.
yeah, but
Lights
we
that aren't
have,
even there.
but we have to address that.
Parks that aren't even open.
It's already open,
Okay.
so,
I
you know,
agree
and
with
we
that.
all know
Yeah.
what those are. And so I think, if we can address that in this budget,
Sure.
Bill, then I'm very happy to do it, because I think it's gonna help us, and then it helps Jessica, and it helps Steve, figure out what they are able to do, and then get the right person to do it. That was the idea, again, that Jessica had in some of the position in order to have, and I think you actually had, maybe kept that in and hadn't cut it down, but.
The wardens, yeah, park wardens, yeah, I didn't
Dealing
touch
with the
that.
park
Yeah, yeah.
maintenance and so forth, so, but we have several key parks that, have to be addressed, like Post Haste.
I agree.
Okay, so as long as that's, what we're going to do, folks, then I'm more than happy to.
I agree.
Go along with
Bill,
that,
what was
okay?
that line number though?
Which one?
The challenge one that you're.
I just added a line, it's up to the controller to figure it out, 7110-405A.
Right,
Okay, thank you.
okay.
I just created that. The next one was Community Day, and the reason why I did this, I understand you spent $28,000 last year. The reason why I did this was to try to show good faith for the purposes of showing some level of incentive to save money. We have, in my opinion, we have actually achieved a model where we are saving money. And I've pushed for that for a number of years, and you folks figured out how to do this, and you got it done. So now, what I'd like to do is reduce that allocation line from 25,000 to 20,000, okay? If we need money, we'll move money next year, but we're trying to show good faith here on a reduction.
Yeah, and on that about moving money, I agree, Bill. One of the things, as you know, everybody here, I've told you, is that the economic situation next year is uncertain.
True.
At this point in time. And back to a couple of the points that you raised, whether it's income, from sales tax or a mortgage tax. So if it looks like it's improving and actually the revenue increase, then we're going to have, a little bit more flexibility as well.
Right.
Right.
At this point in time, I want us to be very cautious and conservative. So I agree fully with the approach, Bill. I don't have a
Caution is
problem.
very important.
Yeah, caution is
You gotta
important.
learn to be able to do more with less.
Yeah,
And I mean, I don't know, that's the going idea across the board.
Especially coming into, and I'll just say, we're coming into a presidential election, right? We're coming into a cycle of potential economic instability.
Right.
What we're doing right now, we're seeing revenues on this latest worksheet
Yeah.
that are incomplete revenues, right?
Right.
So I'm just trying to shave a little bit off here just to be conservative going into the next
yeah.
cycle
I
here.
think it's really doable. I think that there were some things we invested in last year that we wouldn't have to repurchase for this year. And I think this being the second year of doing that.
And also, we've discussed, a little bit different approach. We still have to discuss amongst the board for how the Carney rides, Midway and everything else, and also some of the money related to that. So I think it's,
Yeah.
fine, at this point, but I want to make sure we have that discussion.
Yes, so all I did was decrease that by 5,000. Now, that being said, there are other lines within that department that we can feed off of, because I found them and I left them in. So the
Yeah.
point is, by putting that number on Community Day, we're showing some due diligence. 7620-102A is that activities assistant. At this point, I zeroed it for now, so we can have that discussion that we
It's that
talked
same
about.
discussion.
Now, 8162-400 was a big nut, and I know you had a methodology supervisor with this. This is the recycle center refuse line. We know that it's been getting more expensive to get rid of all the refuse.
Right. As I've said, before, we're going to be facing a $220,000 net loss this year. I think we need to cut more than this and then have a solution and require.
Well, that's what I was
No,
trying
no,
to do, yeah.
My proposal was going to be actually tonight is to cut 100,000
I
off
just
of
don't
this
know-
budget, but require us to address it.
I just don't know if that's gonna be realistic though,
Well,
because,
but here's the point, I'm not sure, and I would say let's keep this open, because I'm not sure if 47,000 actually makes a difference or actually can be executed, the way that the recycle yard's set up. And again, we're not talking about eliminating the recycle yard or closing it down, but make it more efficient in light of the $220,000 loss next year.
if you look at the actuals though, that's where I came up with this, going back to 2015, 132,000, 2016, 126,000, 128,000 in 2017, then it jumps to 149,000 in 2018. 2019 through August 16th, we're at 86.7. At this point, all I did was try to find a happy medium at 100.
Yeah, but you can't do that.
No.
Because Royal Carting has put us
That's
on
right.
notice that the costs are increasing significantly, over $20,000 a month.
Yeah.
Plus the recycling portion of it, where we would get credit for, let's say, metals.
Right, right.
That's going all away.
There's no value, yeah.
There's no value anymore. And then, there's been other issues with respect to batteries and storage. So that's where, the net cost has been rising significantly, over the years because of the carting costs, basically.
And, one of the things that surprised me the most in going over the numbers, and Frederick, had gone through and found it is striking what percentage of the cost is from furniture and
Yeah.
large items. Which is, I don't know what, it's probably 40 to 45% of, I'm just talking about the carting costs.
Yep.
Well, it's probably based on weight, right?
No, it's actually.
Volume.
It's volume.
It's volume by
It's a
the
very
container.
large volume.
Yeah.
And that's the issue is, and we don't really have, I don't believe we charge a different fee based on the
No.
size of items.
No.
And that's the problem is basically, we take large items and we are losing a lot of money on those large
And
items.
it's the white goods, it's other things, and the issue is two days a week, half on Wednesday, and then all the overtime on Saturday, and so,
I mean,
the budget bill reflects what Frederick and I have calculated is what we've already been advised by Royal as our cost for next year, it's
So
increased that much.
do you know where we are right now, Frederick, in real time?
So the average cost is a monthly fee of 20,000 right now. That's why we figured that for the,
It costs
contractual-
$20,000 a month,
Yes.
Per month. yeah.
And it's
For-
going up 20,000.
and that's only, that
Next
only
year it'll be
includes,
$40,000
That's only
a month.
dumpsters.
next year it's gonna be $40,000 a month?
I think they're going up 20, aren't they?
Well, right now it's 20,000, it's gonna go up by 14%.
About
14%. So what, effective January 1st?
Yes,
That's what it
that's
says.
right. We've been notified.
3 months.
So, I mean, we gotta look at the genesis of this whole operation.
Right.
This was a free service that was started in, the early 2000s, Joe, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose of this
When the
was,
landfill was shut down, right?
well, the landfills were closed off, but the purpose was to, encourage people not to throw their belongings on the side of the road.
Right, which we still see, by the way.
Right, and it was to give people the ability to get rid of things,
Agreed.
really. And it was kind of a situation where you could bring anything up there and get rid of it. We also had bulk pickup going on at the same
Right, and
time.
we still have requests for that, which, are.
The problem is the bulk
Consider-
pickup is the same refuse cost because it's the same items.
Right.
So, do you want to pay for the people to bring it there themselves, or do you want to pay for the people to have it picked up at their house in addition to it
And the-
being disposed of?
Yeah, and the calculation is that if we were to do a bulk pickup in addition, it would be another 250,000 or so, in order to do it.
And these are,
I had constituents complaining that the county only did it 3
Yeah.
times this year.
which is the Resource Recovery Center, which is really designed to have an outlet for you to get rid of your batteries, fluorescent light bulbs, and all those kinds of things, because you can't throw those in the trash, because
Exactly.
when they
Right.
burn it, it
No, I-
emits
And that's what's
mercury.
happened with the
I-
list. The
no,
list
I
of
understand.
non-disposables has grown that we
Right,
can't
that
collect.
has grown, but it's not just limited to that. It's
No.
anything you could fit in a trailer.
Oh, really?
Furniture,
Yeah,
whatever, and
yeah.
people are complaining that the county only did it 3 times this year.
The option is
And
to
I
go
was
to
like,
Royal, which is
there
just
noth-
outside the town.
Well, of course, I told them that,
Wonder how
but they weren't
expensive that
happy
is.
about that either.
So what are you supposed to do with your garbage? I mean, I pay
No, I
$62.
think we need to do something, we need to have something, but it's, how do we reduce those costs, right?
Right.
I don't know.
To make, well, that's
No,
what we have
that's
to
it, that's the
discuss,
problem.
I think Joe's had some ideas, Vinnie had some ideas, even Royal Karting had some ideas, so I think that's what
But
we have to
that's a big problem,
explore.
yeah.
Well, for the budgeting purposes, if it's gonna be, if it's $20,000 a month right now, is what we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
So,
If it
And
goes to 40,
14%.
you're looking at what,
In
$480,000?
So that's-
January, right, 14%?
14%, no, I understand.
well, that can't be right, $20,000 a month, because that's
Yeah,
240,000.
Initially, it wasn't that at the beginning of the year, but right now it's an
Yeah.
average of 20.
Because they've increased their invoices to us,
Yeah.
we've been tracking it very closely,
It's a lot of money.
yeah.
Well, I mean, we've never paid more than 150,000.
No, I know, but that's correct, though. That's why
Well,
our
I mean,
numbers are showing
one
higher.
of the other
because
issues
they're-
is DEC has made a lot of changes on landfills as to what can be disposed. One of the things that's been very difficult in conversations with Royal is that in the past, DEC, you used to be able to use C and D debris as temporary cover on the landfill. So every night, a landfill has to be covered over until the next day.
Right, but we're not landfilling here.
No, but Royal has to pay that cost on the tipping fee when they take it away.
My understanding is all the Royal contents go to the Resource Recovery Center in Dutchess County.
Yeah, but I don't know if they've been burning everything or been, because
I don't know. My understanding is it all goes there. I
Right.
don't know where it goes from there, but.
right. Because
so-
I don't believe all of it's been, I don't think it's being burned. So,
Do you want to leave this at 197 for now?
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
although I think we have to reduce it,
right.
figure out a way, what's the approach?
I mean, the other option is to
We're one of the few now that has a recycle.
look, the other option is to look really hard on the revenue side.
And right now, the revenue is what, 80, what is it, 86, 88,000, Frederick?
About 80
Yeah.
85,000.
Yeah, that's based on
85.
$50
Fund
permits.
of whatever the permits, yeah.
So even after
you're not-
that, our next net loss is 220,000.
Well, but to
next
the
year.
extent you increase the fee on larger items, you're gonna reduce your disposal costs, because people aren't gonna bring it.
Yeah, they're going to throw them down by the New
They're gonna
Hamburg Road
Yeah,
Bridge.
Right.
that's right.
That's what they're going to do.
They're gonna throw it on the side of
There's only
19.
so much you can fit down there.
Go down there. I went down there 2 days ago. By the way, I talked to Bob Balkine. They're gonna send a truck over and pick that stuff up.
Good,
We'll
good.
talk more about what we can do to partner with them.
Right.
But that being said, I put it 150 in an effort to try to show some level of,
I think it has to be more if we're going to do it, because I don't think that there's, 47,000 reduction is doable. I agree with you. Bill. It has to be-
175. Do I hear 175? Want to do that for now, or just leave it?
Leave it,
All right,
let's come
just leave it.
back.
All right, let's go to B
Discuss
fund.
the,
B fund, relative to law enforcement, the reason why I proposed this was our original appropriation for the last number of years was $188,000 for vandalism patrol. I went back to the original number of 188,000, which we adopted last year in 2019. In addition to that, we had the $12,000 that we had included for targeted traffic enforcement a couple of years ago. That brought it to $200,000 as the total. For the purposes of this budget, I recommended that we go back to 188 on the first line and then leave the second line alone at 22,000. That increases by, that's a $10,000 increase.
well, I understand. I think we need to have it the same amount that we're spending this year, because we've had a significant increase in traffic, patrols and
Right.
Covering of locations, also increased drug, paraphernalia. They've been monitoring the parks a lot more closely, and so
Well, the other
that's where those
question,
costs are. So what we had budgeted for, I think we need to keep it in there for the safety of the town. How we split it up, then I don't have a problem with how it's divided.
Well, right now, the year-to-date was 124, so I figured 188 would be.
No, they've advised me that it's, gonna meet, it's gonna meet or exceed the budget.
I mean, because one of the issues is, I believe
We haven't received all the.
we're paying kind of a pass-along as far
Yeah.
as the sheriff's.
Right.
Right, but whatever money we appropriate, they're gonna spend, so that's the bottom line.
Well, no,
Well, you'd have
I mean,
to
we're
reduce the
marching
number of hours.
closely where they go and how they spend it, right, Bill? We've asked them to increase these patrols, which they've done, so. I'm very concerned, we should, that's why I suggest let's keep it open and then we talk about it further so we can discuss the items.
My
that are-
suggestion would be, if we have, Frederick, have you looked at that contract?
Well, they sent us new.
They sent us also increases that were.
Right, I mean,
we
that's,
discussed that.
that's kind of one of the, so to
Proposed
the extent
increases.
you go to this year, what you're doing, because they've had a salary increase, you're gonna reduce the number of hours.
Right.
Right, but now we're getting back into the
It's
debate
probably-
where is it cheaper to have two 40-hour-a-week police officers working in the town than it is to have these 4-hour blocks?
Well, that's,
And we
Well,
had,
that's an issue to discuss, I
Right.
think, in connection with this, Bill. I
You know.
wouldn't touch it, at this point in time in this, budget proposal.
but we're looking at
Let's
it.
discuss that,
I mean, I'll put that one on hold, but we'll come back to that for the final budget. So just
Yes,
leave it.
Yes, we come back to the final.
7310.103B, playground counselors. Jessica, you'll be able to answer this question now. These are the summer camp counselors, correct? 7310.103B.
Yep, that's the counselors.
All right, so the reason why I reduced this is because looking at the year-to-date, there's only $30,000 spent and the summer camp's over. So why are we gonna budget for 50,000?
I mean, you can reduce it. We have to hire based on our enrollment and based on the increases in minimum wage. So what we would have to discuss once we get further on is, do we want to cap the number of kids who come to summer camp, which is an option, people do that, to make sure we don't exceed the budgeted amount for personnel? Or do we discuss possibly using contingency for that if we have a boom of summer camp kids?
Well, basically, looking at 2018, we had a lot more participation apparently, because we had $42,000 there. The year before 30,000, the year before 28,000, the year before 30,000. So rather than
We cut
50,
one from last year just for,
Yes.
yeah.
okay, rather than 50,000, I was proposing 40,000. And if we do have a huge, onslaught of kids in the summer camp, I don't have a problem moving money, but
That's good.
I
Yeah,
think
I
it
don't
would
have
be,
a problem
you could
either.
save $10,000 right there by just
Yeah.
changing
Oh,
that
yeah.
allocation.
I think it's doable.
just, I guess the only thing you'd have to look at is what's the percentage increase on the minimum wage from this year to next?
70 cents every year.
So, yeah, 70 cents. I mean, we just went through this.
Yeah.
So what is the minimum wage gonna be? $11.75 or something?
1180.
11.80? I think we're fine. If we have a situation where we need
can
more
always
money,
move it.
then
We're
you
already
just put money
increasing
in.
from 30 to 40 anyway, so
Yeah.
I think that covers that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. All right, 8015 101B was your deputy zoning administrator. I know we need to have a conversation
have a
about that. I
conversation.
zeroed the line for now until we can have an organizational structure
As
created.
long as we have that
I agree.
discussion.
All right, over to the DB fund. I remember having this debate in previous years relative to Blacktop, 5110-405 DB. There's $50,000 budgeted for Blacktop, and this is Blacktop for potholes. That's what we've traditionally used this line for, 5110-405 DB. Based on historical spending, I decrease it from 10,000 to 40,000. That's all.
Yeah, I would say, Bill, with respect to any of these items, you can address it that way, but I think that we should also make sure that we have consultations with the highway superintendent and the highway superintendent-elect, because I know that, particularly even on the last one, the highway salt, Mr. Sheehan as well as Mr. Bettina both have some strong opinions that it shouldn't be reduced. But, for now, we can do that, but let's have that discussion.
And I've recommended this a couple of times. I think what would be more helpful in the budgeting process for salt, blacktop, fuel, is looking at historical, quantities.
I agree. Somebody please make that happen.
Yep.
Because we've always looked at just numbers, but we deal with very large quantities, and even a minimal fluctuation in price will result in a big budget impact. So
Well,
One of the things that we're going to discuss, and Bill, I think I mentioned to you already, we've already taken a survey of how much salt's sitting up there.
Correct.
Right? We're looking at the process of how to, measure and weigh, with the trucks and the deliveries that, take place. And so I think we can work out a process and, in this budget, discussions, deliberations for doing that, and accountability, greater accountability, what goes in and out. I think that needs to be a condition with whatever we issue. My concern, and Mr. Sheehan's concern, was that, with respect to the salt and now this winter prediction that we're getting, that right now we have 2,600 tons sitting in the yard, okay? And so, that's a matter of, how long is that going to take? I think he still feels, and Vinnie still feels, that 5,000 tons is what we should be shooting at for next year as far as the total amount. But I think we need to discuss that. So I don't have a problem with, discussing it, but I'm a little bit concerned about, cutting it at this point in time. But let's get it into tonnage.
one of the other things that
Gallons and what have you.
I've suggested in the past, and I'll see if I can dig out, there's a capital reserve fund for winter weather, which addresses the two issues that we just discussed. Basically, you can use this capital reserve fund to buy salt, and also in the springtime to buy paving for blacktop to fill potholes. So it kind of kills those two birds with one stone. But it is a capital reserve fund. And, should you have additional funds in the DB fund at the end of the year, you would then push that money over into this reserve fund, which would then be available in the next fiscal year to purchase salt or to purchase.
So in current DB fund, are we able to do that then in this budget process for next year, or?
But yeah, I mean, you can also, adopt it sometime this year, and if there's,
Right.
a surplus, rather than, because at the end of the year, if you have a surplus and it's not spent, it goes away.
Right.
So rather than have the surplus go away, you can channel it into a capital reserve fund to capture it, so that for next year, it would be available for purchase of salt or blacktop, and only for those purposes.
So we typically purchase 5,000 ton of salt. Isn't that typical?
We've actually, I mean, again, it depends on the weather conditions.
Right, obviously, but
I had a conversation with the highway superintendent, and he had run some numbers, and I believe there's 16 routes, and there's basically each of the trucks takes 2 loads per route, and I want to say it's 3 or 4 cubic yards, but we had a calculation, and I believe 5,000, I believe at the end of the day, 5,000 tons would get you 24
Or 23.
passes through the town.
That's right, yeah.
So, you know, in essence, and again, some storms may be 2 or 3 passes.
So I,
That's not 24 storms, that's
Right.
24
Right.
passes through the
now,
town.
it sounds like though, where we're at today, one of the problems is we don't know how much we have.
No, we know we have 2,600.
Okay, now we do.
We do.
But when we had this discussion previous, do we still have some on back order? Because we
That I
didn't,
don't recall.
from our
I
last
don't
storm, when we appropriated that extra money, we didn't receive the full deliveries on that.
I think we still have some on that.
Right, so but I mean, saying,
So-
we have to know to calculate this.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, CPL has been sent out engineer and do it, and I think they have a methodology down that we
Good.
will use.
So,
going
so,
forward.
so one of the problems with buying salt is that the budget year goes from January to December, but the storm season runs from basically November through March, April.
Right,
So this time of year, you're basically buying salt for next year,
Right.
using up whatever's left to the allocation for 2019 in anticipation of filling the barn as much as possible so that you may get a January, you know, you may get salt, have salt through January based on the 2018 expenditures.
right.
And then the 2020 expenditures, you're buying for maybe March and,
The fall next year.
and then the fall. So,
But to Bill's point, we must have greater accountability and
Absolutely.
measurability on
Absolutely.
this. you know.
Well, the other issue, to be fair, is that the price has fluctuated significantly over the past few years. Just looking right now, as of November of last year, the state contract was $62 a ton, okay? It has fluctuated as high as $109 per ton over the last few years. So based on $62 a ton, 5,000 tons is $310,000. That puts us on track of where we were
Right.
previously. So, I have no problem leaving this alone at 385. My thought was to try to get it down to 350 in an effort to show some level of savings. But based on this discussion, you know, we can just strike that for now.
the one issue regarding the contracts for salt, in a year where there are a lot of storms, the contract is a $5,000 ton take or pay. So if you exceed that, there's a certain overage that you can get, which is typically, I want to say maybe 1,000 tons. But basically, the contract, the initial contract is for a certain amount. You can go over it by maybe 10 to 20%. If you go over it by 30, you know, more than that amount, you then pay whatever the market rate is.
So you're locked in
Right.
for your purchase plus,
But
Whatever.
so let's say it's a very icy year and
Right.
everyone wants salt.
Right. It's fine
You
with me.
may have a contract for 5,000 tons at 70. Once you get to say, to need 6,500, the price goes from $70 a ton to $105 a ton.
If you can get it.
If
if
you
you
can
can
get
get
it.
it.
That's
Right,
right.
that, we've had that issue
That's
too.
right.
You know?
So that's the problem with salt, because you're buying salt, and then what happens is if you don't, so you're gonna contract for what your typical usage is per year, which has been 5,000, which is pretty, I mean, there's times where we've exceeded that, but the problem is if you exceed, it, you can't go buy 2,500 tons of salt, because if you need salt, you're going to pay through the nose to get it.
Right.
I think what would help going forward, obviously, is to document why we need 3,000 more ton. You know, it's a terrible winter.
I think that's what we've been talking about
Yeah.
for years, though.
Yeah,
This is not a new
but I dare say
conversation.
we don't have that documentation.
I think basically
today.
what we need to do is, as we've said before, we need to calculate how much we have, and then basically when it goes out, based upon the number of runs that happen, we subtract that number so we know how much
Right.
we need and how much is left and how much we have to allocate for in the future.
That's right. So we have the base right now,
Yeah.
we have the methodology,
Yeah.
and then we just have to really enforce it.
And hope Mother Nature is
Yes,
nice.
I agree.
Well, I mean, that's fine, but I mean, we'll know what number it is no matter what.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to deal with it, then at least we'll be able to calculate what our needs are.
You know, some of the other municipalities have switched to brine systems, which are much easier to measure. But that's a substantial cost. to
Yeah, the initial
equipment.
cost per truck, $6,000.
Yeah, we've talked
Yeah,
about
around
that and
50
regulated the
million.
amount with certain trucks and everything else. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do, but obviously it's a cost issue as well.
Yep.
So, relative to DB fund, we discussed blacktop. Gas, diesel, I decreased 15,000 to 75,000 based on historical spending. That's 5132.400 DB. Brush and weeds is something we talk about all the time. That's actually 5140.400 DB. I decreased it $10,000 to 15,000 based on historical spending. And then we will just not touch the town highway salt line at this point, based on our previous discussion. So those are the changes that I proposed. There's a
Now,
number.
the brush and weeds, is that the personal services or contract?
No, it's a .4 line, so it's a contract line.
Okay.
So what I would say here is if the board is comfortable with omitting the following amendments that I had, the first one being the Justice Court postage based on our discussion about bail reform, disregard that one. The Recycle Center refuse line, which is the last one on that page, based on our discussion relative to that. The Vandalism Patrol and the B Fund, based on our discussion about that. And then the Town Highway Salt line, based on our discussion about that, which is the last one. So I would move that we adopt these amendments as part of the preliminary budget adoption.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Motion passed.
And then I'll move that we adopt the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2020.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed.
And if we no business, I'll make a motion
Thank
to
you.
adjourn.
Well, I'd just like to comment,
Yeah, he wants to upstate us, so.
so with respect to,
Hold on, Councilman.
Hey, that's the next thing on the item agenda I have, but anyway, go ahead.
I know it's getting cold in here.
Yeah, it is.
with respect to Sergeant Palmetier Way.
Yeah.
Old Hopewell Commons, a developer has, I don't know if all the board was aware of, somehow we lost a lane.
I don't think everybody was on this email, but let me just say before you get into this, over the last 3 weeks, there's been a lot of discussion about the exit entrance, proposed exit entrance to Old Hopewell Commons.
Understatement.
Which would become Sergeant Palmetier Way, okay? Bruce Flower, who's the planning board chairman, happened to notice when he was driving by 3 weeks ago that it wasn't wide enough. Based on all these discussions we've had about making sure the car carriers can get in and get out, for whatever reason, I don't want to get into the details on what happened here, but there was an approval that was granted, not by us. They started construction, and instead of having 2 lanes out and 1 lane in, which is what we had constantly discussed, it ended up being 1 lane in, 1 lane out, and it was clearly at least 10 feet too skinny, right?
That's right.
So, to the credit of this full-time staff here, including the supervisor and the planning board chairman, they were able to get a conference call going with the professionals the next day. The supervisor recommended that they stop work immediately. Whether they did or not is debatable. But now, they pulled the curbs out the other day, they widened it to
Yep.
spec, and there was a summary meeting today, or was it yesterday?
Today.
Today. And
Today,
Jim,
this
can you
morning.
just let us know where we're at now?
Yep.
So where we are right now, the new curbs are in. The curves were increased to allow for car carriers to be turned in there. So the intersection of Old Hopewell and the new road is done. And I believe the town engineer has, and the highway superintendent have gone out. County is satisfied with it. So that intersection right now, the only thing that needs to be done is some signage, stop signs, street signs, things of that nature. But as far as the paving work, the drainage work, the curbing, that's all in. They've actually got the binder coat all the way up to the old Route 9 right-of-way. So that work is done. The actual buildings are in the process of being completed, and they're looking to get certificates of occupancy. Where we are right now is, in order to accomplish the transition, we're going to have to close off Sergeant Palmetier between Old Hopewell and the new road. It's also going to be basically closed from Middle Bush Road to just beyond Curry Lane. It'll only be open for local traffic, so the businesses along there and people into Curry Lane, but there will be no through traffic. And right now, we're looking at, the discussion today was to how to accomplish that. There's going to be, probably by Friday, flashing signs to notify the public that from the 15th through the 22nd, or 15th through the 25th is kind of the outside date, but we're probably looking to have it open by somewhere around the 20th. The idea is to get it done all before Thanksgiving. So what would happen is around either the 15th, over that weekend, the construction, the road would be constructed, closed off and construction would begin. What they would do then is take out the blacktop or the existing concrete that's there in Sergeant Palmetier, finish up what they have to do is shim the pavement so that there's a level surface, there's no bump. So they're gonna do some grinding and level that out. It's anticipated to take 2 or 3 days. And then they're gonna tear up the pavement between the new road and Old Hopewell. At the time of the closing, around the 15th, they're gonna erect concrete barriers at the southern end at the intersection of Palmetier and Old Hopewell Road, and then just above the area of construction, around, I guess, the Toyota, just below Curry Lane, there would be another barrier to prevent traffic coming through. They would do the construction in there. We are drafting for the meeting on the 13th. I'm going to draft resolutions accepting the new road, subject to, so the town board will accept the new road, accept the maintenance bond, subject to the final approval by the town engineer and the highway superintendent of the intersection, this new regrading to blend the new road and the old road together. And then at that point in time, the planning board is going to adopt on the 18th, they would then sign the subdivision plat, which would then get filed with the deeds up in the county clerk's office. And then probably around the 19th or 20th, the new road would be opened. Understandably, the developer's attorney doesn't want the public accessing, the road as a private road. So it would open to travel to the public upon the conveyance to the town. So we'll have all those documents drafted for the 13th. And then at that same time, we're going to convey the property that's being torn up, the stretch of Sergeant Palmetier that's being torn up. That way they have title to that so that, they can do the construction work there. The town is reserving an easement because there's there's water and sewer, I believe, in there. So there's a blanket easement over the property that's being conveyed because there are some utilities that are in there. So.
We just have to make sure that we still have direct access to the park right there also.
Right, so, and that's one of the things, that will be, there'll be an easement, again, that's part of that blanket easement. And they intend to, one of the conditions is when they come back for approval, for the, in essence, lot that's being created in that area where the new road is. There was a proposal at one point for a bank.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could get any more banks within 20 feet of there.
It's a pad site, so
But,
the,
yeah.
Could be something.
the original discussion was it'd be parking area
Right.
accessible for the park.
Correct, so, and that's in the resolution, and so at some point in time, that would be, fleshed out. So, that's where it is after a lot of work, and many years. It looks like probably by the end of the month, the road will be hopefully done.
Good.
I would just say on the Jersey, or the concrete barriers that they're gonna have in place there, it's not a well-lit area right there, so there needs to be reflective material on the concrete barriers so that at night, people that don't know there's been a change of.
Especially after the first day,
Right, yeah,
Yeah,
you
there's
make it-
also gonna be
Maybe
signage,
they
in
should have
addition to
some
the
police
barriers.
there. Maybe they should have some police there,
I don't know if that's gonna work.
flashing or something.
I mean, the point is though, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and somebody's coming home from work and they make a left at the arrow and they go to make a quick right and there's a barrier there now.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at is a temporary sign, one of the flashing
Variable
signs.
message boards, yeah.
Variable message board, on Route 9 at the left there. And then, for the closure. So, right now, the variable message sign at the south there is gonna say, talk about when the closing's gonna happen.
Are we
And then-
putting anything in the media?
What's that?
Are we
Yes.
putting anything in the media, like the papers?
Yeah, and we'll
Yeah,
put it up on the
website.
In
website.
our
so-
Something
social
should
media,
be
all that
there.
has to be there.
Put it on TV?
Yep.
Yep.
sort
And
of
there's
thing.
already 3 variable message boards sitting right there for the next project,
Yeah.
which I did see the supervisor's
So,
correspondence.
so I was going to mention that, I think the board is familiar, but I'm, in light of the issues and the time that was spent, myself, also Councilman Beal, Councilman Cosman, with respect to Myers Corner Road, and I think the 7 complaints or so that I had filed, with respect to that construction project. We do have a new construction project about to start with respect to Old Hopewell Road. I have written a letter to the, DPW Commissioner Balkine, as well as the county executive, copying the board
Saw it,
members
yep.
and our engineer, requesting us to be updated regularly on the scheduling, to be allowed. I want to have CPL, our engineers, keep an eye on that, along with Mike Tremper, and to minimize the confusion that's going to exist, and make sure it's done right. And so we will be posting that, and I assume, based on the response from Commissioner Balkan, which was a favorable response, is going to work on it and let us know, so we can have regular communication and then be posting that on our social media sites, and keeping the board advised.
I'd like him to get back too on the inspections that he does on Chelsea Road. I mean, I'm still waiting for a report on that from Mr. Balkheim.
Okay.
I spoke to Commissioner Balkine today about this. Here's one of the issues that I was hearing knocking on doors. So the signs say seek alternate route. Now, between Old Hopewell Road and Myers Corners Road, there's 40,000 cars a day. Most of those cars are dumping off onto Old Hopewell Road East, believe it or not, okay? If you look at the numbers between Smithtown and
Yeah.
9 versus Myers Corner and Old Hopewell, between Smithtown and Old Hopewell versus between Old Hopewell and Myers, the lion's share of cars are going onto Old Hopewell Road to go to Hopewell.
Correct.
Yep.
So people are asking me, how else can I get to Hopewell?
Yep.
Because if you take Myers Corners Road, you gotta go out to the Castle to 376 all the way, it's not exactly.
Basically, it's 52 up over
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So people are saying, what do I do? How do I get to Hopewell?
Great, the same
So
here.
I asked the commissioner that today. I said,
Yeah.
it says seek alternate route, but what is the alternate
Yeah.
route? Because every
Exactly.
single person that needs to go to Hopewell has to take Old Hopewell Road.
Yeah.
So
Hence the name.
he said that they're gonna make an effort to make sure there's at least one lane open. Now, that's gonna be a task there because
Yeah.
during the peak times, it backs up on that arrow. Now, real quick, we need to keep an eye on the queue time on that red light on Old Hopewell Road
Yep.
east, so that we're not backing up beyond the new Sergeant Palmetier Road extension.
that was one of the things we looked at
Yeah, great.
as part of.
So we have all these things going on.
We looked at that, and that seems to have been, in essence, the reason why it was located
Well, there's
where it
1 hour
was.
there's 1 hour each day where it
Correct.
could potentially be an issue. So if they need to make an adjustment on the timing on the traffic light, we're gonna have to be able to let them know that there's a problem.
I mean, based on the traffic report that was done, it looks like the queue is sufficient. The only problem is that the left turn kind of blocks one of the things that the county may want to look at. I mean, because the other issue is the construction work's not going to go to that side of 9, but
It
I
could
think
back
the
up.
left turn, I think that the length of the left turn lane there is too short. Because what happens is the left turn is stacking, I think, and blocking the through traffic.
Right, so it's one of those things where the traffic engineering report, it says one thing, but as you know,
Right,
in reality, sometimes things are a little different. So I think we just have to do our best to keep our eyes on this and relay to the traffic engineers. My concern is that with the construction project going on the east side of Route 9 and the new intersection layout, there could be a perfect storm that occurs here where people are backed up through the intersection. So anyway, I don't want to go any further with this, but at least we had the conversation.
Agreed.
But regarding the budget, Frederick, you've done this for quite a few years, right?
Right.
Do you have any suggestions to us, especially to the new board members, how we could do maybe more with less?
Well, the revenues, I mean, as we have seen, they're pretty tight. I mean, apart from sales tax, mortgage tax is going down. We are not even sure that we'll receive the aid and incentive to municipalities. I hear there's such a suggestion that it may be carved off from sales tax, that I'm not sure. But currently we have it in the budget, so that's, something that we really need to think about whether we should remove it. And if we do, then we'll be taking away or out 66,900. So things are pretty tight. I mean, our revenues, I don't think they're going to be going up much. I don't think the property tax is supposed to go up. So the only way would be to, cut, to the extent that
To
we
do
can.
additional cuts?
Yeah.
Okay, I
The,
appreciate it.
the issue that I have expressed discontent with the county budget director is that based on this proposal that the state has,
Yep.
okay, if they're gonna take the if they're gonna take the sales tax revenue, and adjust it so that it's coming from the county sales tax formula, there could be an A fund, B fund issue. In other words,
Yep.
right now, our sales tax comes into the B fund because we have a village in our town, okay? The A fund revenue that we get from the state, state aid, right, comes into the A fund. So there could be an issue where they're saying a portion of that state aid has to come from the county sales tax formula, where it's gonna,
Yeah, exactly.
you're gonna lose revenue from the A fund.
Yep.
So I expressed this issue, because not every town has this problem, because not every town has a village in it.
Right.
So her response was they're still waiting further guidance from the state. So the only thing we can do is budget status quo.
Yep.
But sales tax is in the B fund.
Correct, so the sales tax comes into the B fund,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But rather than getting the state aid directly from the state, they're going to.
Oh, I see what you're
The
saying,
AIM
right.
funding, they're gonna
Right.
take it out of the.
They're gonna conduit it through the Dutchess
Yeah.
County sales tax formula.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah,
it comes
so-
into the B
right.
fund, you lose A fund revenue.
That's right.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, and
That's
that's.
the problem.
Yeah, it is.
That's $266,000.
That's the
Yes.
problem.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a- that's
Exactly.
a-
So
that's a-
that when I said this, expressed this to her, she said, "Well, that's not good." But remember, it's not the county doing this; it's the state
No,
doing
right.
this. So anyway,
I mean,
So I think we still have room for further cuts.
I don't
be honest with
think
you.
anyone in Albany,
Certainly, we can make those amendments at the next meeting.
And
except
that
for
next
3
meeting is on the
people in the
13th?
controller's office,
Okay,
know the difference between A and B fund.
Right, and we've had that debate at the Association of Towns. So anyway, my point is, we just have to budget status quo and figure it out, because they don't even know what they're gonna do, and their fiscal year doesn't even start till April,
Well,
right?
based on the memo that you
And-
shared
and-
with us, and based on
And
the
based on
environment
past track
that's out
record, they're
there,
gonna do
I think we
something,
need to be a
get
little bit more
complaints, and then
prudent.
change it
Well,
all
that's
after
what
the
we've
fact
done.
anyway.
Or
I-
they just
I
won't
think
do
we-
anything.
I think we
Dick,
need
you've done a
to,
good job.
yeah.
So we have a good start. We'll move up
Okay,
much more.
all right, well, I'll make a motion to adjourn then.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Motion passes.
Jessica?
At least the heat.